What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emer Kezi. I'm sitting with Cameron Selby, and we are going to continue our outlook videos for all the divisions and looking forward to the 2025-2026 season. So we're going to be talking about the NFC North. This is an awesome division, and this is the division, that had obviously the most wins in football. I believe it was a poll of like 45 or something crazy. And one of the hardest divisions to win in, one of the hardest divisions to compete in. A 14-3 team didn't even, had to be the 5 seed because of how good this division is. And so
neither team won a playoff game.
And neither team, yeah.
I mean, none of them did.
None of the three.
Yeah, it was insane. But a lot of it was a mixed bag of the way that they were, the trajectory in which they were going towards the end of the season, or just injuries catching up. But we're going to start off with Chicago, which is one of the things that we were very wrong about. This year we had them as a dark horse playoff team with Caleb Williams coming in. We loved their roster overall, but we severely estimated how poorly coached this team was and the coaching staff they had. It was atrocious, and we didn't expect coming off the bye that they would lose 10 straight games.
Yeah, they were 4-2, and we were like, okay, we talked about it because they had a pretty, easy schedule overall. Also, we didn't expect Minnesota to be a 14-3 team. We didn't. We expected maybe the Packers to take a little bit of a step back. They were an 11-win team. So it's a couple things that just didn't go our way, but at the same time, like, they beat the Rams in those first 4 games. They beat the Jaguars, who we thought, okay, the Jaguars are, we had thinking they were pretty good. They had some injuries. They beat them by 19 points. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay. And then they lose Commanders, Arizona. Yeah, they're the Hail Mary, which started everything, 18-15, and then Arizona, they got blown out basically. Then they got blown out by the Patriots. It's just like, golly.
And then the Green Bay, field goal debacle.
Yes, that was ridiculous.
And then the Minnesota, coming back down 10 in under a minute, and then just blowing it in overtime. And then you had the Thanksgiving thing that just broke the camel's back with the just letting the clock run out on the final play, and that's what led to the firing of their coach. And
it's a little too late.
It's a little too late. It was already a much tougher NFC, not only NFC North, but just NFC in general. We didn't expect a 10-win team to miss the postseason in the NFC, and that's what ended up happening in the West, which we'll talk about in the NFC West breakdown.
Well, we can actually talk about that team because they played that team, and it was a 6-3 game.
Yeah.
What the hell? Like, no. No way. Like, it was okay, this season for the Bears was just weird. Can we just be very honest? And 10 straight losses, and then to beat the Packers in the last game of the year in a game that actually mattered for the Packers and not for the Bears, obviously. But
right.
It's just that. Let's talk about what they have.
I mean, at the end of the day, we were
wrong.
We were wrong.
It's okay.
And it's fine. But at the end of the day, we could just be one of those things where we're just a year early. They have all the cap space. They have a quarterback rookie contract, which Caleb, he didn't have a terrible first year. Like, he went like on 8 straight games without a turnover, but there was the advanced metrics and the ones that kind of stood out that were interesting. And just being below 32 in a lot of stuff, deep balls, holding the ball too long, a lot of the sacks. Like, they had 68 sacks on the year, but I think only 42 were considered surrendered. So he forced 26 extra sacks on his own play of either holding the ball too long, extending. So it's stuff that has to be cleaned up. And again, poorly coached team. But now you get somebody like Ben Johnson who comes in off of, a historical season with the Detroit Lions. He's been their OC for a few seasons now, and just 30 points a game back-to-back years. Biggest point differential is what Detroit had, and he's bringing a lot of his staff with him. Antoine Randall will be the assistant coach. And then, Dennis Allen, who was the coach for New Orleans, who just they ended up running out of bodies and obviously missed their window. But, he's been a very solid defensive mind that doesn't really get enough credit because sometimes people are just really good coordinators and not great head coaches. And I view him as one of those guys. So Chicago was kind of up and down in a lot of areas. Like, for example, fewest pass touchdowns allowed this entire season was by Chicago, but they were the 3rd worst in, yards per attempt per play. So they gave up a lot of big stuff, but kind of held their own towards the end. So a lot of those things have to be cleaned up. They have the cap space to do it. It'll be interesting. On top of that, having an extra second round pick from Carolina, the final pick from the Bryce Young trade a couple of drafts ago. So it's one of those interesting things. Another tough thing to think about is even if we do expect improvement, all of a sudden they didn't take advantage of their easy strength of schedule. Now, the NFC North in its entirety have all in the top five toughest strengths of schedule this year. And so you don't really see a fourth place team having a top five strength of schedule. And that's exactly what Chicago has this year.
Well, just going back to the Caleb thing, I want to just, try to defend. There's not much defense, truly. But he is young. He did have some multiple coaching changes this year, so he had to go through that. But there are some things he has to overcome, obviously. 46.7 QBR is not going to get it done. And having the receiver room that he had, Keenan Allen is a free agent this year. I don't know if they'll bring him back or not, but Rome will step in and be that number two. It's not a problem. But there's just some things like you're saying that they need to clean up. I don't think it's defensively as much. I think they need to get a little bit more pressure. But otherwise, I think they're pretty solid over there. We liked this team. That was what we said last year. So we still like this team. Like, that's not changing, especially with $69 million in cap space. And then only two legit free agents.
Yeah, they're not bad enough to be considered 6 games lower than the third place team in this division.
Right.
Like, the gap is much closer than that. I don't know how much they can jump. Maybe it's another year that we're waiting and seeing before they truly become a playoff contender. But it's just one of those things that it's a year of growth, and year one's going to tell a lot with Ben Johnson if he could instantly turn it around, or is he just one of those, like you've said off air, of just being one of those, like, hey, you're a good coordinator, but like, I'm worried about you going in division and performing as a head coach.
I just feel like sometimes we put a lot of, it's just like there's a lot of eyes on it, and like expectations and pressure that comes with being a head coach for the first time. And I always like just seeing it before I believe it. And that's why it's not that I just like, Ben Johnson. I think he's an amazing coordinator. But it's just like, I just haven't seen him be a head coach yet. So I want to see that before I'm just like, this is the guy.
Right.
But I'm not against, I think it's a great hire. And it's obviously the best hire for, projecting, him being really good.
Exactly. Like, they could have very well done what our favorite move was Mike Vrabel to the Patriots, which we've talked about. But Mike Vrabel brings in just a no-name offensive coordinator, and then it's just, you're setting a better culture. But at the end of the day, like, Caleb needs to clean up a lot. A lot. Yeah. And I think he overestimated that he could just get by with raw ability and then figure it out from there. Something like a Brett Favre-esque thing when he used to say, I don't even know what a nickel defense is. Kind of things as an NFL player saying that. But getting away with the 20 touchdown but 20 interception kind of seasons.
Right.
Which obviously that's not what Caleb did this season, but that was what felt like the mentality if you watch Chicago games, which we bet on a lot of Chicago props and DFS all year. So we were paying attention, and it was frustrating to watch sometimes. Like, for example, the Detroit game in which Eberflus got fired. Like, we saw just nothing in the first half. Like, missed throws after missed throws. He had like 30 yards at halftime. Ends with the over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns.
The talent is there.
It's there. But I think that, coupled with how many rookies had success in his same class, is what also kind of gives more eyes or negativity towards him, which is another interesting thing in itself.
Well, let's see what happens after year 2, okay? Because normally quarterbacks actually have a worse year 2, but he only has one way up. Yeah. It's one way to go, and it's up. So exactly. He should get better. Next up, we got the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love led the Green Bay Packers at that. They lost to the Philadelphia Eagles, and obviously Philly goes on and dominates for the rest of the playoffs. Oh, sorry. Rams were next, and then they dominated. I apologize. $49.14 million in cap space, 13th, which is really great. And then they have their own picks in the draft. Then they also, you look around, they don't have a ton of guys that are, leaving. If you look down there at the notable departures. So a team that has a lot
Yeah, and there's one sore spot, and it's obviously at cornerback because they have so many pending departures. One notable name that's going to be a departure that hasn't officially happened yet, but they're looking to move on from Jair Alexander, whether that's a trade or a release. Which some people like a Cooper Kupp, for example, you can be like, hey, nobody's going to trade for him, so we're going to just say he's getting moved on from. But with Jair, he's still somewhat at the tail end of his prime, so he could still warrant like a day 2 pick from somebody. So it's going to be interesting to see what you can gain from that. But also, you have to hit that on multiple spots. Like we saw, like Philly last year had a horrible spot at corner, and then doubled down the first 2 picks. Same thing with Detroit. Same thing with who was the third team that
Baltimore.
Baltimore
Baltimore
was the third team that did that. All of them had secondary issues, and all of them double addressed it early on. And so Green Bay is one of those teams that corner starting to become sneaky deep, but also because of the high end guys all coming off injuries, maybe that'll cause some guys to slip into that 54 range where you see their second rounder as a late pick. So that's just kind of one of the biggest things that I could prioritize or emphasize is just that's what needs to be addressed, but everything else is pretty solid. Like they were one of 2 defenses this entire season to finish top 6 in both total defense and scoring defense. So and Philly was the other one. They won the Super Bowl.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of good pieces there. Their offensive line was strong, top 6 as well. Zach Tom led all right tackles with PFF grade at an 87.6. So a lot of great building pieces. In the playoffs, it's just kind of like they ran out of bodies because Philly actually did not play well in their wild card game, but Jaden Reed went down. Christian Watson already tore his ACL. Dontayvion Wicks went injured, and Romeo Dobbs got concussed. So they were down the top 4 receivers playing catch up against Philly in an ugly game, and it just was like can't just do it all to Josh Jacobs, who had a great first year in itself with Green Bay.
Yeah, no, he was killing it. I was thinking about what you were saying about that 54th pick, and I was like, well, Benjamin Morrison could be a direct replacement for what Jair is because they're similar size. They play with that like chip on their shoulder, so I think that could be that could make some sense. But yeah, like you said, we weren't as high on the Packers just overall to begin the season. We said that they were going to lose the final game to Chicago, and then they weren't going to make the playoffs. Well, they lost the final game to Chicago, but still made the playoffs. It's such a good division. I have a hard time. The question is, are they going to go up, stay the same, or go down? Like, I just don't know that there's room to just go up. And that's my biggest, threat in this whole thing is, can they move and get better?
I think the positive thing with this is that I think naturally Detroit and Minnesota both are going to come down.
Right.
And Green Bay is probably the only team that's going to stay lateral. So maybe staying lateral is enough to usurp one or two of those teams. I still expect them to be, playoff team and contention and all that stuff once again. Jordan Love, he had a sneaky great year as a second-year starter. I mean, his first game ends up getting injured, and we thought it might be a season-ending or a significant one, and then only misses 2 games, comes in, plays very well in October, then gets banged up again, but then, overall ends up at the top 5 QBR on the season, and that's with, multiple injuries to the skill player group. Luke Musgrave, Dontayvion Wicks was in and out, Christian Watson was in and out, Romeo Dobbs was in and out, Jaden Reed wasn't in and out, but they just didn't want to use him.
Yeah. Is what it is.
Is what it is. So, kudos to him for doing that well. But it's just kind of one of those things where there's not many areas of weakness, and you have enough cap space to address it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The cap space is awesome for what I expected, honestly, when I saw the screen. Minnesota Vikings. Quarterback is one of the biggest questions for them, obviously, because you have the situation with Sam Darnold. I believe they're going to let him go. That is kind of how it has looked with how, honestly, you don't act like you're going to let someone go if you want him to be worth something. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I don't think they're going to, obviously they're not going to franchise him because it would be way too expensive. But, if they're going to bring him back, they're not making it look like they want a bidding war, basically, at this point. Byron Murphy actually had a resurgence in his career. It's what happens when you go to the Cardinals and situations are bad and you don't have a very good, first 4 years. But came to the Vikings, had a really good year this year. There's some guys on that list though. Everybody up there is worth it. Like worth talking about on those notable departures. Like everybody on there has actually been a good player or consistently is a good player currently and isn't like aging out. Some of them are aging out, but like Aaron Jones, Dalton Reisner, Jerry Tillery, all those guys are solid players. So
yeah, and with Minnesota again, it's funny. Just the epitome of their season was just won every game, then lost to Detroit and the Rams. Then they won every game, and then lost to Detroit and the Rams. And that's what their season was. 14-4 officially with a wild card loss. It's unfortunate the way it ended because it was such a good season. But Kevin O'Connell was coach of the year, well deserved, even though there was a lot of notable names that were worthy of that regard. But yeah, I mean, I think they just overachieved. Sam Darnold had a hell of a year, but I think in the end, the last couple game stretch is going to help them in the long run because that helped force their hand at like, okay, we're going with JJ.
Yeah.
And anything that, I don't understand the logic of people doing the betting markets of Aaron Rodgers as a favorite to go to the Vikings or pairing a lot of veteran quarterbacks to there. And I just think that they've shown nothing to make it seem like they're not going with JJ. And as soon as they ended their season and they were talking about Sam Darnold, you don't, like you said, talk about that if you aren't officially moving on from him. And again, their hand was kind of tied because he was on a 1-year deal, and it's not like they're going to get much in return unless he goes for a significant deal and then they get a compensatory pick, later next season. But yeah, I think it's a JJ sign, and at the end of the day, they're going to go down naturally based on record. I don't know if they can become continue to be a playoff team, but they're well coached, and Brian Flores, one of the best DCs in the entire NFL right now. Their defense was just awesome. A lot of splash plays, tied for most takeaways, tied fourth in sacks. Passer rating allowed was second best. A lot of good things, a lot of great areas. Kind of similar to Green Bay in the sense that a lot of work needs to be done in the secondary. And it feels like we always say this with Minnesota, at least since we've been doing mocks and stuff like that. We're always doing mocks, cornerbacks to them because they just haven't figured it out. But they actually figured it out with 1-year deals of the cornerbacks that killed it. Like you said, Cameron Bynum as a safety, Shaq Griffin, Byron Murphy Jr., a former first rounder, that all did well. But the only starting player in their secondary that is returning is the 36-year-old Harrison Smith. So that's just something that you can't just like, oh, we're going to figure it out and be okay.
Well, I would say too, this is the team that has the most like chance to have a downturn. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a 9-8 team next year, an 8-9 team even. So they could have a losing record, but JJ starting his first year, he's a young guy. He actually was the youngest out of all the quarterbacks that came out last year out of the top 6 that we actually talk about the most. And so he'll be able to have, luckily, that year of learning under his belt. He has good receivers, Jordan Addison. It's not like he's not going into a situation where he has a ton of good players. I'd expect them to possibly try to bring Aaron Jones back, but I don't know if they'll be able to. But they have the money. It's not like they wouldn't pay him. It's just, did the market truly reset with the whole Saquon thing? And then, like you said, secondary. You got to pound the secondary when they go to the draft and stuff.
Yeah, with Minnesota, I wouldn't say that, oh, now that you went 14-3, this is where you take the next step and you become, Super Bowl contender. I don't view that with them, and just because I don't view that as like their outlook going forward is bleak or anything of that.
Right.
No,
yeah.
If they go 9-8, but JJ McCarthy looks great, there's no like, oh, yeah, I don't see it even after a year of holding the clipboard because of his injury, and then also we weren't certain of his being worthy of a top 11 pick when they drafted him in 2024. But if he just looks great, looks the part, has a similar success of like a Bo Nix or something of that nature, because he has the skill group to do it. Mm-hmm. He has one of the best skill trios in TJ, Jordan Addison, and obviously Justin Jefferson. And then obviously if they bring back Aaron Jones, that's a really solid back. And if they don't, they just draft one of these really good 30 running backs in this draft,
sure,
then they're going to be just A-okay there too. Their offensive line is really solid. Christian Darrisaw tore his ACL So that really took a hit on their overall ranking. He was really, really good through the halfway point of the season. I think he got hurt in the Rams game, if I remember correctly. But it's just one of those things where, a couple seasons ago when they were like 11-0 and one score games, and it's just like they're not what their record says they are. Kind of similar ordeal this year where they went 9-1 in one score games.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like one of those things that doesn't always, that kind of usually kind of rectifies itself and comes back down to the mean a little bit. So I expect them to take a step back, but that doesn't necessarily mean bad things in the long run.
Sounds like a good culture if you can win a bunch of one-score games in multiple seasons,
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like somebody's doing something right. And then the Detroit Lions, who have one of the best, if not the best, rosters in football. We're going to be just talking about it, and I believe, you just look at their offensive line. All 5 of them are solid. I believe Zietler is going to try to go to the Chicago Bears. I think that was already announced that he's a free agent, and I believe that he is trying to get out of there to go to the Chicago Bears to follow Ben Johnson. But there's some other players that have done really great for this team. Of course, there's big ones. Amon-Ra, Jameson Williams. We watched Jahmyr Gibbs have an insane ending to the year. David Montgomery, of course, is good. Jared Goff has basically had a resurgence and done really well in Detroit. And then Sam Laporta. So the offense is great. The defense, the only issue is basically their secondary. Keep pounding the secondary away because, Carlton Davis is a free agent. They've got, everybody's a free agent basically, and they're behind their starters. And then Carlton Davis was one of their starters, but he did get injured this year.
I feel so terribly for how their season ended because they all year were our team to beat in the NFC at least. They stayed our power ranking number 1 all season long, essentially. And other than the first one when Minnesota started out 4-0, we had to give them their flowers then. But they passed them up the very next week when they played them, or a couple weeks later, rather. And they just ran out of bodies on defense. That's the epitome of what it was. Obviously, Aiden Hutchinson for the first month of the season was decoy favorite and broke his leg. Hopefully he returns. I'm glad he actually did not return in the postseason because I just want, full year removed and we'll figure it out and be okay. But everything was, they were performing up to expectation. The 33 points per game were best since 2019. Number 1 point differential plus 222. It was just incredible. Best passer rating allowed, and that's defense. That was the weakness, and they were elite at those things. Jared Goff was having a career year, doing best in multiple categories. But Sonic and Knuckles, you talked about Jahmyr Gibbs leading the league in touchdowns, but they combined for 32, and that was with Amon-Ra and Jameson Williams combined for 20.
Yeah.
And that doesn't count Sam Laporta.
Talk about scoring points, man.
Exactly.
Just keep scoring.
My concern is their coaching. They're losing 8 assistants. Both coordinators took, obviously, Ben Johnson going to Chicago, Aaron Glenn going to the Jets, Antoine Randall, who's a well-respected guy, enough to be an assistant head coach. I think he'll be a head coach one day. But Dan Campbell has been praised as being one of the NFL's best head coaches, but I think it's just because he's had the balls to do what he wants to do.
Yeah.
But he's not an X's and O's guy.
Right.
He's an energy guy. He's a culture guy. Well, if you don't have the X's and O's guys anymore, and it's not like they brought in, well-known or well-regarded coordinators to replace those kinds of guys, like how much of a step back is that if you're going for it, early in the season on fake punts in your own territory, and then all of a sudden you drop in games you shouldn't.
Right.
Because next year they have the number 1 strength of schedule, or worst strength of schedule. Want to emphasize that they are playing 12 teams with winning records in 2024 out of their 17 games. Big difference. Because remember last year when we were doing fantasy videos, anything about Detroit, we were talking about, 13 of their 14 first games are in a dome or at home, and that has a lot to do with how they're able to play their way. But losing the minus that they did, I'm worried that even though they have one of the best rosters on paper, that is an overlooked loss that's going to possibly knock them out of a Super Bowl window earlier than people might expect.
Yeah, John Morton is their new OC at this point. Let's see. Yeah, so he was an offensive coordinator for the Jets in 2017. And then after that, he was a senior offensive assistant for the Raiders, and then a senior offensive assistant for Detroit. Came back after he went to the Broncos for a couple of years. So he'll be their new OC. And then on the other side of the ball, you have Kelvin Shepherd, which I have actually never heard of Kelvin Shepherd. So maybe you know something about Kelvin Shepherd that I don't.
I mean, Kelvin Shepherd, I believe he was an internal promotion.
Okay.
Yeah, he was linebacker coach
okay,
over the last couple of years for the Lions. So he's a first-time DC. But then the other guy you mentioned, John Morton, even though he has been an OC, I don't remember exactly where the Jets ranked in 2017, but it wasn't very high offensively.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes to the Raiders. I think you would remember if offensively they just stood out in the seasons that they did. Denver, we talked about how poor their offense was before Sean Payton was there, and he was the passing game coordinator. So it's not like you brought in guys that are just like, oh, you're going to pick up the slack and we're going to stay scoring 30. And so, it makes me worried a little bit about them.
No, I completely agree with that. But yeah, I still think they have one of the best rosters. And so naturally, they're just a team that's going to be a tough team to beat. And as long as they don't do the dumb things that we just talked about and lose games for no reason, like you just said, they could still easily be a 12-win team, and it wouldn't be surprising at all.
Yeah. But then also we've seen, hangovers from good NFC teams recently. Obviously, that's Super Bowl hangover as well, but like the 49ers being the best roster in football and then missing the playoffs entirely. Obviously a lot to do with injuries. There's no denying that. But just want to read off the Detroit Lions opponents, because opponents are out, schedule's not, but, it's something to go off of. And I told you, every single team in the NFC North, top 5 strength of schedule, Detroit's the worst. Obviously, this entire division, which combined for 45 wins, so none of them are shoe-ins, and they typically split 3-3 throughout the division most years anyways. You go to the road to Baltimore, to Cincinnati. You got Dallas. You got the Giants. Okay, gimme.
Yeah.
Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Tampa Bay, Kansas City on the road, the Rams on the road, Eagles on the road, Commanders on the road. I just put I'm including Dallas. 2 gimmies. Everything else is kind of like, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a lot.
So it's going to be hard to when we do projections, because they are going to be one of the highest, over-unders, to find a way to get to 12 wins. Honestly, I think this could fall all the way back to a 10-7 kind of team, and that could make it very sneaky as a dark horse team going in. But this is not going to be a number one. They're going to just waltz through the season at the top of the conference, and they're going to be the buy and lock it in, even if they do stay fully healthy. So coaching changes on top of the schedule, they could be taking a step back further than people expect this year.
Well, that is the NFC North. We have one more video after this. It will be the NFC West. That is our only video that we have remaining. We have already talked about now 28 total teams. So if your team is not in the NFC West, you have already been talked about. Please go check that video out. And they're in it's actually in this playlist. So this playlist is set up. So just go ahead and click the button. But we appreciate you hanging out with us. Please go like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Comment anything y'all want to talk about for these great teams in this really stacked division, at least this last year. And maybe talk about if you think they're going to get better or worse, because obviously we're going to be doing prediction videos later on. But right now, in the original outlook in early March, there's a lot of concerns on certain teams, and some teams have a little bit less, but I don't know that I think they're going to win 45 games as a total, basically, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, but we appreciate you guys tuning in. We've been breaking down every single video or division in short videos for outlooks and stuff like that. We'll be reacting all off season. Please leave likes, comments, subscribe if you haven't already. We're on the road to 250, getting close.
Yeah.
After a killer first look of mocks and big boards that we put out, we just reacted to the combine and all that stuff. So please check that out when you can, and then leave some comments. I know we have friends of the show for almost every single one of these teams in this division. So if all of you don't comment, we're going to have some things to say. On top of the new friends that we'll be making, if you are, Lions, Packers, Vikings, or Bears fan, we want to hear your thoughts too, if we're right, wrong, or what you're concerned about or optimistic about going forward for these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. But like Cam said, get in the comment section. But until next time, guys.